gets bigger and bigger. Lying on my back in my bed, just looking up. Curiosity has me frozen, so I want to see where this goes. So it became kind of a long, oblong, oval-like portal in the middle of this cloud or fog that formed in the room. And then all of a sudden, I saw these two snake-like movements within the portal go from bottom to top. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And they continued to move from bottom to top. And I could see that the cloud or the fog was coming into the room from the inside circumference of the periphery of the opening of this portal or gateway. And I remember thinking, oh, whatever that thing is, at least on the other side of the portal, not in my room. Well, I spoke too soon on that.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we are joined by author Anon Omous, who takes us through his extraordinary mystical experiences which changed his life and his understanding of the world. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, these experiences were challenging and brutal at times, culminating in a waking vision of what he believes to be the entity Yaldabaoth. It's a really fascinating account and one that will no doubt deeply resonate with Spirit Box listeners. Now, just a bit of a warning, Anon does talk an awful lot about mental health treatment that he went through in the 80s and early 90s. That might be difficult for some people to listen to, so just giving you a heads up there. However, this is an amazing story and a really incredible account, and I think it's worth your time. Now, in the Plus show, we start to discuss the kind of symbolic meaning of what may or may not be going on, how there's some alignment with folkloric trials and tests. It's a really interesting conversation and one that I think thematically will resonate with a lot of people, particularly that, we've had a lot of conversations of late about Ordeal and facing the shadow, and this feels like it's very much in that territory. So I think it's something there for everyone. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, really straightforward to do so. Just join the Patreon, and you'll get the Plus show here and the back catalogue of everything, and also going to join our wonderful Discord. And before I forget, Non has authored a quite a large book about his experiences and his thoughts. That is very extensive, and the links to pick up that are down in the show notes. So if that grabs your fancy, then you know what to do. And then in terms of shout outs, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Rose Auroras. She gave me a reading the other week there that was really fascinating, really insightful, and picked up on a lot of stuff. Shit got real. Again, link in the show notes there. So do check out her work and get yourself a fantastic reading. Okay, should we get on with it? Let's get on with it. Wonderful. Anon, you're very welcome to the Spirit Box. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite.
Wonderful. So to get the show on the road, could you tell the listeners a little bit about you and your experiences and how you ended up getting an invite onto SB here?
Certainly. Well, for starters, I consider myself a recovered schizophrenic. And when I say the word schizophrenic, it's a misnomer. It's an improper label because I've come to the conclusion that schizophrenia, it truly is a shamanic experience that some pass, and unfortunately others do not. I went through a diagnosis of schizophrenia probably in my mid-20s, back around 1989, 1990, 1991. And I am fully recovered today. I haven't had to be on any medications for it since about 1992 or 1993. Currently, I'm living a good life. Work as a mechanical engineer. I've been a building inspector, or I've had a building inspector's license, a fire inspector license. I've been a lobbyist, so I've had a good career throughout my life. I might be retiring in a few more years, but I just want to point to your listening audience that just because somebody has a diagnosis of being schizophrenic does not make it a life sentence. It is curable. It is treatable. And I consider it more of a religious or spiritual experience when I went through it. And that's how I recovered, to tell you
Right.
the truth. So to begin with, I was baptized Greek Orthodox, and I actually attended several Christian churches in my town growing up. I was attending a Methodist Sunday school in my youth, and during my later teenage years, I was part of a Catholic youth group, even though I wasn't Catholic. So I've kind of had the exposure to the Greek Orthodox aspects, the Protestant aspects being the Methodist space, and then the Roman Catholic aspects, participating in this youth group. And they were all good communities. So you do the usual things, learn about the stories of the Bible. You're coloring the animals of Noah's Ark and everything like that with your crayons. And I took a lot of the scriptures to heart, just in the idea that we should try and be decent human beings. Is really what it comes down to. I can't say my family was a what we call Bible bashing or that strict on things, but I took it to heart. In other words, being a good person even when nobody else is looking, with the idea that hey, God's
Right.
paying attention. You still got to be ethical, even when nobody's around, and trying to be as ethical that you can given the circumstances and the environment. So when I got out of college, I had some time on my hands. I wanted to kind of read the Bible for myself without any middleman. I really wanted to dig into it, see what it said. And upon doing that, I started to read the New Testament, some of the Old Testament, the Book of Revelations. Some things started happening that I didn't quite understand. I started to go through some experience of, you might call it ego inflation, but it's almost like feeling Christ-like in a sense. And I remember when going through some of these experiences, I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm feeling Christ-like. What makes me different from all the other nut jobs out there saying the same things? Hey, I'm a Christ, or I'm reincarnation of Jesus Christ, that sort of thing." So I kind of took it. I had to go in a state of split mind to be aware what was going on here. These feelings and sensations. I mean, all sorts of synchronicities were happening. And I try to take the scientific approach because I have a logical, analytical mind, being an engineer. So I was looking at this more from an observer standpoint, paying attention to what was occurring. And what happened is that at first I felt kind of very euphoric, and then I started feeling like very down, like something was attacking me, or something was kind of telling me how worthless I was. So I started out kind of feeling rather euphoric, and then it twisted when I started to feel the opposite, almost like in the total bottom pits of emotional existence. And a lot of things were happening simultaneously. And the thing about schizophrenia is there's multiple aspects to it. I mean, there can be a manic aspect, there can be a depressive aspect. There's the hallucinations, which can be either auditory, visual, or a combination of both. And I know that they refer to them as hallucinations, but it's interesting how a lot of the schizophrenics seem to have the same type of hallucinations. And as you know, hallucinations, be they visual or auditory, should be random. And they're not. They seem to follow a certain set of patterns. So what was happening? I started to get kind of very depressed, and I started to have a lot of negative, intrusive thoughts coming into my mind. Now, at first, I was assuming that they were my own thoughts, and later on in the interview, I'll tell you why I came to the conclusion they were not. They were being planted or put there. So, among this kind of chaos happening with these intrusive thoughts and everything, it was almost like it was digging up every dysfunctional aspect of the family that I grew up with. I mean, there was drug abuse in my family, there was a death, there was definitely gaslighting, narcissism, the whole spectrum to some degree. And I tried to get through the family upbringing the best I could. I just felt like, oh, this is something that we have to experience as humans, these dysfunctional environments and that sort of thing. But I didn't realize just how intensely it had affected me until my mid 20s, because it kind of all caught up. It's like something was waking up, or something was taking those occurrences that occurred and amplifying them, or trying to generate negative emotions out of me. So it started out kind of this spiritual battle, and I started to crash very intensely. And by crash, I mean just going into such a deep depression. Like something kept telling me I was worthless. I had no value to offer. And I remember I stopped eating for a while there because I was made to think that I wasn't even worthy of food. Whatever these voices or thoughts that I was encountering, it was trying to end my existence. And I remember at times my body started moving and thrashing about, and I wasn't the one controlling this stuff. There was something else going on. Now, in college, I had taken courses on psychology. So I had taken general psychology, comparative psychology, and abnormal psychology. So I was very aware of the DSM manual, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists use to diagnose certain conditions. And really, what that is just it's just an insurance code that they have to put down. They use it for insurance coding purposes because the book is made by a committee, but I don't think it's that accurate in how it's actually applied. So here it is. I'm going through some of these conditions, and I remember being aware of schizophrenia from my abnormal psychology courses. But I was saying, boy, this feels like something's trying to take me over. This feels like a possession of some sort starting here. And all this culminated to kind of a breaking point in 1990. I finally reached a point where my body was kind of thrashing all over the place. My arms and legs were moving, and I wasn't the one moving it. At times, I couldn't talk. Like I would try and say something, and it was like somebody else was taking over my vocal cords. Like I would go to say something, and the words would not come out. It would be almost like I'd say a sentence. I would start it, "Hey, how are you?" And I'd go like that, and something would lock me up. So I couldn't get words out. At times, there were very odd body movements. So finally, with the thrashing, I ended up in the emergency room at a hospital, and they were trying to diagnose, was it neurological, was it chemical, or was it something else? So they concluded that it was psychological. And at the same time, a lot of anger was coming up. It might have been repressed anger from the dysfunction of my childhood, or something was stirring up that anger deliberately. It's tough to tell. So from the emergency room visit, I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, actually a place called Princeton House in New Jersey. They're still there. I was in the hospital for about 4 weeks, and I was at rock bottom. I had no hope of a future. I felt like everything was lost, everything was worthless. I remember my income that year was below poverty level. I was very fortunate to still have some credit cards that weren't maxed out, so I was able to still maintain health insurance and pay for necessities. But other than that, I had very little access to other aspects of life, that sort of thing. I mentioned I was barely eating, so I was able to still have health insurance. So being in the psychiatric hospital, that was no picnic. Uh, with the schizophrenia, they asked the usual questions like um, they would try and give you all these different types of pills and drugs to try and snap you out of your condition. And I got the usual line that, oh, my brain chemistry was off. And this medication will help readjust your brain chemistry. And I would ask them the questions, well, then what's the baseline if my brain chemistry is off? And the doctors just give me these blank stares because they didn't have answers for that. And when you go to get blood work done these days, for cholesterol levels or red blood cell counts, there's a certain range or bandwidth that's considered normal or nominal. With the brain chemistry, they don't have any of that. So that notion that your brain chemistry is off is a bunch of bullnor. It was actually something that the pharmaceutical industry came out to kind of explain why their drugs work. So being in a psychiatric hospital, they really don't know which drugs are going to work. I remember they gave me so many different combinations of pills. Try this one, try that one. And the side effects are awful. I mean, it's not the type of thing you want to do for recreation or trade around on the black market. I mean, sometimes they make your feet feel like lead. dry mouth. I can remember one time I was on some sort of medication there, and I would turn my head, and the scenes would take a while to shift to catch up to where I was looking. And nothing was working. None of these drugs were snapping me out of it. And they would always keep asking me, "Are you hearing voices? Are you hearing voices?" And I would answer, "Yes, I am," but with a caveat. I would say, "Oh, it's just because it's a lack of sleep. It's just because my mind's playing tricks on me." Because part of me didn't really trust what they were doing there. Like I felt like they didn't know what they were doing. Some of the staff there was great. Some of the staff there not so great. So, like in life, you have to sort through who you think really is looking out for your best interests and who may not be. But I remember one particular night in a psychiatric hospital, the voices got so intense, it became a cacophony of like, sound like what men's, women, and children's voices, like talking, attacking me, saying things. And I was trying to ignore them as much as I could. And what happened is the voices eventually, the cacophony kind of got less intense and it became almost like a committee of voices that were talking. And they were like talking back and forth. But I remember distinctly one of the voices saying, "What are we going to do about him?" And this all happened about 30 years ago. So I'm pulling up things that I do remember very, very solidly, very, very specifically. So none of the medications were working. I felt like I wasn't sleeping. It's like, when you go to sleep at night, you wake up eventually and you have some time that you don't really remember. Like you feel like, okay, I was asleep because all of a sudden I'm up. When with this schizophrenic condition, I felt like I wasn't sleeping. It's like I close my eyes and there'd just be thoughts and dream state. Like I was aware of everything that was going on. So none of the pills or combinations that they were giving me were working. And those medications, they don't solve the symptoms. They're tranquilizers. They just numb you out or knock you out. So stuff can still be going on internally, but you're just tranquilizing the brain. You're not actually solving the root cause of what's causing this. So none of the pills, medications that were giving me were working. So I was approaching about the fourth week here being in psychiatric hospital. So the last step was to resort to electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. And that's where they would give you anesthesia. They basically shock the brain with electrical voltage. Now, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't like the way they did it back in the 1970s, 60s, and 50s, where people convulse all over the place. They break bones and everything. It was a very, since they give you anesthesia, it keeps your body from thrashing around. But they did say I would suffer from some short term memory loss. And so they gave me the ECT, the first session. And I have to admit, I felt better after the first ECT. It was almost like my mind was calm. I felt like I could rebuild myself. I felt like I could start over, get on with my life. But the hospital staff insisted, "Oh, no, 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 you have to have at least 6 ECTs." I felt like I was ready to go after that one, but they insisted on doing 5 more. And it seemed like whatever was attacking me or whatever the voices and strong thoughts, that they had dissipated, at least for a while. So I was discharged from the psychiatric hospital. And about 3 months later, the voices and strong thoughts came back. But they were different this time. They seemed to be more organized in the fashion of how their attacks were occurring. And my mind kept going back and forth, whether these were my own thoughts or if this is something from going on externally. Because I almost felt like it was a spiritual religious battle. So I was on the fence. I kept going back and forth. So I remember a series of trials and tribulations started. This would have been about December of 1990, January 1991. And I remember something was offering me a path to instantaneous wealth, power, fame, if I basically sold my soul to it. And it would actually show me how to get there. I would probably have to give up my ethics, become kind of extreme narcissist. And I said no to it. And it was tough saying no to it because, I mean, I was in a state of disrepair. As I mentioned, my income that year is below poverty level. I had no hope of a future. I was suicidal. And then this offer comes, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I had these Christ like feelings, and now something's offering me mammon, path to riches, power, fame, the aspects of this material world. I'm thinking, well, I really must be nuts. I mean, I'm reading the Bible. I'm have these kind of Christ-like feelings, and then I'm starting to encounter something that's making me this offer, which is supposedly Jesus Christ was offered the from the ruler of this world the same type of temptations. So I'm thinking, well, I must really be nuts. I didn't trust myself. I knew I was off, and during this time period, I stayed away from all alcohol, all type of recreational drugs because I felt like I needed to face this head on, and I wanted my faculties to be able to deal with it. So that initial offer soon ended, and I didn't know what was making the offer. I didn't know if it was coming from something malicious or benevolent. And I went through a series of these stages. So it would go from like one stage to the next stage, almost like I felt like I was going up a hierarchical pattern of these voices or thoughts. And I would even call them entities at this point that were making me these various offers. And the next stage, it made me feel extreme guilt for my existence, shame. It was like telling me how worthless I was. And it would point out every so called sin that I ever committed in my life. And by sin, I mean like killing a fly. Um, I used to go fishing. And of course, you have to bait the hook by putting a live earthworm on it to go fishing for trout, bass, or sunnies. And these thoughts would keep bringing that up again. And it would say, see, you're a horrible creature. You kill other creatures. You're not worthy to exist. And these thoughts or voices or entities would do everything they can to kind of make me feel guilty, to generate negative emotions, make me feel bad about myself. So I started to defend myself against them. I said they would accuse me of, eating the meat of other animals and that sort of thing. And I would tell them, hey, look, God created me with teeth, tongue, and mouth. Other animals eat other animals. Do I not have the right to do the same? I said, I didn't create this world. Take your arguments to God, not to me. So I was taking a religious path to this. Here you're accusing me, a human being, of being this way. And it's like, hey, I was made this way. Don't go after me for those things. So I started to argue against them. I was defending myself. And then it would go to like a different stage of tribunal. Now, I don't know if I was being tormented, tested, or initiated throughout this whole process. It's tough to interpret. There's multiple interpretations of this stuff, as you're well aware. So a later attack, it kept telling me how worthless humanity and I are. It's almost like it wasn't just attacking me, it was attacking all of humanity, saying that we're a worthless species. We didn't deserve to exist. It's kept saying we're insignificant lumps of flesh and bones, destined to rot, be eaten by bacteria and worms. So in these battles, it wasn't like I was just being attacked personally. It's like it was attacking all of humanity. And I felt like I was acting as an advocate or defense attorney for both myself and all of humanity with these attacks. And this was interesting because I started to stand up, as I mentioned, I started to stand up against them to argue back to them. Sometimes I would argue back out loud. I would talk out loud to them. Other times, just in my head, I would say things back to them. But I countered their argument about saying that we're insignificant lumps of flesh muscle and bone, and just destined to rot in a grave. I countered argued that by saying, look, we were created by the divine hand. We didn't decide the composition of our flesh, blood, and bones. It was granted or forced upon us. So I said in defense of their arguments, it's like, how can you accuse us of our form? I said, we didn't make our form. I said, take your arguments to God, but that's where you will find the answers, not with me. And this was really interesting because the attacks in this particular trial stopped rather soon. Like about most of these trials and tribulations went on for months at a time. This went on for 2 weeks, and I could tell that, hey, my argument was strong enough. They didn't have a case there. They backed off right away, and that was interesting. And I started to see this pattern. And again, I'm still going back and forth. Is this just going on in my head, or am I actually dealing with something external of myself? And when these voices or thoughts or entities were trying to prove to me how horrible humanity was, it would actually show visual scenes in my head, like cinema, of all the wars, the violence throughout history, and would say, see what humanity does? They'll never learn. They're worthless. They don't deserve to exist. And I would constantly argue against them. I would say things like, yes, some humans are full of hatred, full of anger, full of violence. I said that, but others are full of love, compassion, generosity. I said, you don't condemn an entire species or culture based on the actions of a few. So it was almost like humanity is being judged through in my head or in my mind, like a little apocalypse occurring in my head. And meanwhile, I'm like, this. The other part of my brain is like, this is nuts. I said, what is going on here? I don't understand this. Who am I to go through these encounters or these experiences? So this badgering went on for quite a bit, and there were a few other different stages of tribulations that I went through, and it seemed like again that I was going to some sort of hierarchy because they seemed the tone of the voices would change sometimes, and the nature of the vocabulary that they used would be different. So the final attack, it was telling me that God doesn't exist or the truest essence of God. It was really testing my faith. Like it was trying to say, give it up. Your life is not worth it. God doesn't exist. He or she's a fairy tale. There's nothing more to you human beings. There's nothing more to you than just your body. And I was defending against these attacks as much as I could. But now I'm probably approaching August of 1991. I'm at rock bottom. I mean, I'm suicidal. I'm dealing with the diagnosis of having schizoaffective disorder. I had no hope of a future. So I reached the point where I just started praying to God, or the highest essence of God, or what I thought God was about. I said, God, give me a sign. I need to know that you exist. I need to know that this is not just purely mental illness, that there's something more profound going on here. I need to know these experiences are real. Give me a sign, anything. I just need to know, because if you give me a sign, I can keep on with these battles. If you don't, I'm done. I need to know there was more to humanity than just Darwin's theory of evolution. That there is some greater story to our existence within the cosmos than just random molecules combining and forming life. So this intense praying went on for about 2 weeks. I didn't care what the sign was. I didn't say what the sign would be. I left that up to God. If a priest had shown up, knocked on my door to say hello, I would accept that as a sign. If a Bible arrived in the mail by mistake, being shipped to the wrong address, I would have accepted that as a sign. If I saw a rabbi walking down my street, I would have accepted that as a sign. It didn't matter what it was. But then what occurred was so profound that It gave me the proof I needed that God exists. It returned meaning back to my life, that there is something going on beyond our normal visual spectrum of sight. And what occurred is I had a vision. You call it a visual hallucination. And as I mentioned, I didn't care what the sign was. I never said what it had to be. I left it up to God to decide that. So about 2 a.m. one morning, after 2 weeks of the most intense praying, I woke up and there was a feeling there's a presence in my room. It was very, very strong, very intense. Now, I've created a PowerPoint presentation so I can actually show you and the audience what it is that I saw. So if I'd like to do share screen, I can share this PowerPoint presentation and show exactly what I encountered. Okay, Derek, can you see my PowerPoint presentation there?
Yeah, I can see it fine.
Okay. Okay. So this is what the interior of my room looked like, where I was at the time. And I mentioned I woke up with the feeling that there was a strong presence in my room. It felt evil, or my ape-like brain was interpreting it that it was evil. So I'm lying on my bed on my back, looking up, and there's a square ceiling light fixture that was in the ceiling above my head. And I just felt like there's something in the room, but I don't know what it is. It was so intense. And all of a sudden, I start to see kind of this smoke or grayish fog started to form in the room. At first, I thought it was electrical fire. But then I realized it wasn't occurring where the electrical wires were in the light fixture. It was occurring in a plane about a foot below the ceiling. It actually wasn't occurring at the ceiling, it was occurring below the ceiling. And it dawned on me. I said, oh, great. Now I'm having a visual hallucination. Here I am, diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder about a year and a half ago. And now I'm starting to have visual hallucinations. Part of me was upset because I felt like my condition was getting worse. The other part was like, I'm curious. Let me see where this goes. Let me see what my mind wants to show me here. What type of crazy hallucination am I going to have? So this cloud starts forming in my room. It was grayish, silverish. It moved almost like the way black ink would move through water if you drop a few drops of black food coloring in. I don't know if this cloud had sentience itself, but it did not move the way smoke would. So I knew it wasn't a fire in the ceiling. And then I started to see kind of this portal start to open up in the middle of this cloud. And the cloud looks like a grayish fog. It's contained. And this portal starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I knew this wasn't normal reality. I never had a visual hallucination before. The portal gets bigger and bigger. I'm lying on my back in my bed, just looking up. Curiosity has me frozen. So I want to see where this goes. So it became kind of a long, oblong, oval-like portal in the middle of this cloud or fog that formed in the room. And then all of a sudden, I saw these two snake-like movements within the portal go from bottom to top. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And they continued to move from bottom to top. And I could see that the cloud or the fog was coming into the room from the inside circumference of the periphery of the opening of this portal or gateway. And I remember thinking, well, whatever that thing is, at least on the other side of the portal, not in my room. Well, I spoke too soon on that. So I knew there was something going on here. And again, I'm going back and forth in my head. Am I just having some sort of crazy visual hallucination? Is this a vision? Is this stuff really materializing in my room? I really didn't know how to interpret this. So the cloud became a lot more solid. I could still tell that the portal or gateway was behind it. And then all of a sudden, I see those serpentine snake-like movements within the cloud, within my room. I'm thinking, oh crud, this thing's in my room now. I mean, I'm frightened. I mean, this is not normal reality. The snake-like entity seems to have entered this cloud in my room. I could see its movements. It's swirling around as it's entering the room, and the cloud got kind of bigger. And for a while, I saw no movements. And then all of a sudden, the entity exited the cloud. This is 100% what I saw, because I had seen serpentine movements in this portal. So I was expecting this thing to have like a reptilian or snake-like head. Hey, it's a snake. It's going to have a snake-like head. My mind's playing tricks on it, right? It comes out with a mammalian head on it. It looked kind of lion dog-like from the side. It definitely had a mane, and I could see that there was a seam running down the side of its body. So it seemed like in the portal it had two tails, but it seemed like those tails can merge together so that its whole serpentine body can act as one member, like they are adjacent to each other. But this is 100% what I first saw, because I remember kind of laughing to myself, thinking, "Wow, this is what my mind comes up with: a snake with a lion-like head on it." So this all happened back in 1991. There was no internet back then. So nowadays we have a thing called the internet, and I found this in the last few years. And this is an entity referred to by the ancient Egyptians as Chnubis. This goes back almost 4,000 years ago. The Gnostics, for those who are aware of Gnosticism, refer to this entity as Yaldabaoth, Yaldabaoth, all different names, Samuel, Soklas. It's also referred to as the Demiurge, however you want to pronounce that word. And sometimes it's been referred to as Abraxas. And this is actually from an amulet from probably about the 3rd or 4th century. But boy, it looks so similar. I mean, you can see the seam running down the side of it in the amulet, which is kind of what I saw. And here's another amulet. This is from the 3rd or 4th century, depicting Chnubis. So Chnubis seems to be the oldest name referred to when talking about this entity. So it comes all the way into the room and it faces me head on. And I was frightened, but I wasn't terrified, because it was. I think if it came out with a reptile head on it or a snake-like head on it, I would have been more terrified. But the fact that it had a mammalian face on it, I wasn't as terrified. But I definitely knew this was not normal reality. So it faces me head on. It looked like a mangy lion from the front. I remember I could see whiskers, I could see stubble, I could see such details. It looked like its left eye was slightly scratched out, like it'd been in a few cat fights. It might even have been blind in its left eye. And I remember when I saw the serpentine movements, so the underbelly was like a light gray color, and then the sides were a glossy black scale-like. So this thing's facing me head on. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then all of a sudden, it comes at me and it changes. The face changes into probably the horrible thing you can think of. It was almost like a old man or old hag of decay. It opened its mouth almost like it was going to devour me. And for a split moment there, every cell in my body was in a state of intense horror. I think I had goosebumps all over my body. And this all happened within a matter of seconds, as far as it coming at me and then changing. At least it felt like seconds. I was terrified. I thought this was going to be the end of my existence, because I think these things really materialize within my room. And I remember thinking to myself, I had a higher thought. If this was the end of my existence, I was about to die. I didn't want to go out feeling in a state of fright. I also had nothing to fight against this thing. I knew fighting would be pointless. This thing was immensely, immensely powerful. So I did something very different. Said, I'm not going to remain frightened about this thing. I'm not going to let it terrify me as it destroys me or it kills me. I'd rather die feeling in a better state of mind than the way I'm feeling right now. So as it's projecting this horror, terror, and fright at me, I projected love towards it. I lowered my ego and I just projected love onto it. I said, okay, you're coming here to destroy me. I'm not going to let you feel fright from me. Have some love. So I don't know if that was my own thought or if something else planted that thought in my head to do that. But the instant that I projected love onto it, it felt like my wave of love going towards it was counteracting its projection of evil. All of a sudden, it disappeared, pulverized, or vaporized. I just knew it wasn't there anymore. And I remember thinking, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I didn't expect to survive this ordeal or this encounter. I knew I was still in the room because I could see the square ceiling light was still in the light fixture. The cloud was still there, although the cloud was starting to dissipate a little bit. Next thing I know, there's a new entity hovering overhead. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this ordeal isn't over. What's this thing going to do? Now, this was very different looking. It had kind of like a white porcelain-like face, and it was sheer, utter beauty. I know I drew it here as kind of a white mask. I don't have superb artistic talents, so please envision this as being the most beautiful face you ever saw in your life. It looked like it had wings or discharges of energy coming out from it. It might have had 4 pair of wings or 3 pair of wings. I couldn't remember the exact amount, but I remember they were fluttering. Sometimes they would be like over its forehead, like moving back and forth. They kind of almost looked like solar flares in a sense, the way the energy was moving, but you could definitely interpret it as wings as well by the way it looked. So this new entity, this is some research I did done on the internet over time. You can see there's various images, but I presented this white mask entity in the upper left-hand corner just to show kind of what the face looked like. It was sheer beauty. It was probably androgynous looking, but I felt like it had a feminine nature to it. Excuse me. And here's an image of a cherub or a seraphim, which looked very similar to what I saw. Now, keep in mind here, I've been praying to God to give me a sign. So if God was to show up, and our typical vision of what God looks like, it should have been, the old man with the white grayish beard and white hair. If I was calling for an angel, it should have been the typical angel with the halo overhead and the white wings fluttering. This was very different what I was encountering here. Now, this second entity, at first, let me go back here. I realized that I was aware of its existence being there, but it didn't seem to be aware of me. It was almost like it wasn't aware of where it was or what it was doing, but I remembered that it wasn't really looking at me, like it wasn't aware of me, but I was definitely aware of it. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I figured that previous entity had turned into something so hideous. I figured this entity looked so beautiful, but I figured it was going to change something horrible and come at me too, to try and frighten me. So the wings are fluttering behind it, and then all of a sudden, its eyes lock with mine, like it became aware of me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if it was judging me. I don't know if it was trying to figure out where it was. it seemed like acting is almost like something that had been in captivity or in prison for a long time and was suddenly released, but did not yet realize that it had been released. I didn't know what was going to happen next. This felt like an eternity we're both staring at each other. I'm just waiting to see it. Its wings are fluttering back and forth. Sheer beauty. I mean, I was tempted to run out of the room because I was thinking, I'm a mere human mortal. This is something from beyond. This is not something that I should be looking at. I'm not worthy to see this type of beauty. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then all of a sudden, this entity, whatever it is, it smiles at me. And I remember with that smile came with a wave from it, a wave of joy, bliss. It was ecstatic. It was love. It was almost like it was telling me everything's going to be okay. You're past the worst of what you're going through. I don't know if it was thanking me, like I had somehow rescued it. I don't know if it rescued me. I don't know if we rescued each other. The next thing I know, I start to have a kind of an out of body experience. I'm rising up out of my bed and I'm starting to merge with this entity. It's like we're becoming one. And I'm in a state of total ecstasy. Never felt joy and bliss like that again in my life. And I'm starting to merge with this entity, like we're becoming one. I almost feel like entering my body. Simultaneously, this entity is going in reverse, like it's going back towards that portal. Most of the cloud is dissipated by then. And just as I'm about to 100% merge together with this entity, I'm wondering if this is what they refer to as a heros gamus, a sacred marriage, and to go through this portal with this entity as kind of one being. I fell back asleep, or I was put back to sleep deliberately. This is kind of the last thing I remember seeing. And everything went kind of gray. And then black. I was very aware that I'd just been put back to sleep. So that's the so-called hallucination that a schizophrenic saw. Now, upon waking up in the morning, I woke up in the morning probably about 4 or 5 hours later, probably 7 or 8 o'clock. I was in a state of religious shock. It's like, what just happened? I do know this much, though. It saved me. Because here it is, I'm praying to God, give me a sign. And then this occurs. I was able to rebuild myself as a human being from that point onward. I would say these strong negative thoughts and voices started to subside drastically as I would get on with my life. Now, I never told my counselor about this experience because I didn't want them putting me on any harder drugs. They had me on a low dose of lithium at the time. That was a mood stabilizer after I got out of the hospital. And I knew if I said, oh, I had this visual hallucination, I felt like if I told my counselor about it, she would have put me on harder drugs or reinstitutionalized me or given me more electroconvulsive therapies. I didn't want that. I felt like this was a religious battle. I felt it was genuine and true and real. So I didn't trust myself after this too. I was thinking, okay, here I am, diagnosed with schizophrenia. I'm going to start having all these other visual hallucinations. Like I'm thinking, oh, now some sort of a creature with a duck face and a rabbit's body is going to come out of a cloud in my room in the future. That never happened. Months went by, years went by. I've never had a visual hallucination like that again, or any visual hallucination for that matter. And so after that point in time, I started to really, on my own research, dig into religion. I wanted to understand what I went through. I wanted to find out more about what the role of humanity is in the cosmos, what the various scriptures say. So I did some research on Buddhist scriptures, Christian scriptures, Judaic scriptures, Islamic scriptures, just on my own. Now I didn't run off and become a priest. I didn't run off and join a cult. I didn't start my own cult. I'm not into controlling others. I have no desire to be worshipped. I prefer to be humble when I can, but I still had to work a full-time job. I still have to deal in the material world of time and matter. So one of the toughest things about after having one of these experiences, or several of them for those that have them, is being able to come back and reground yourself to live in the mundane world of time and matter. This was a very profound experience that I went through, and this was back in 1991. I was probably in my mid to late 20s, but it saved me. It was the turning point, I would say, when I went from thinking that I was mad to kind of looking at it as more as a mystical experience. And then this thing called the internet comes about decades later, and you start to learn about some of the similarities of this stuff. For example, that entity I mentioned that I saw with the serpentine body and the lion-like face, the Gnostics referred to him as Yaldabaoth or the Demiurge or Abraxas sometimes, but he's considered the evil creator of this world, almost like a ruler of this realm. Now, the view of that entity being the Demiurge is another possibility. And there's different views as far as whether the Demiurge, the creator of this material world, is good, bad, or indifferent. Plato viewed the Demiurge as being something good or a necessary part of the mechanism of the universe. Some of the Gnostic sects did not treat the Demiurge so kindly, or Yaldabaoth. They viewed that we're here in some sort of prison, being on this planet. And I look at these as possibilities and conjectures. I don't have the absolute answers. I don't pretend that I do. Some people view this world as a prison, some as a playground, could be a training camp, could be a boot camp. We really don't know for certain. But I do know this much. After those experiences, there is something going on beyond our world of time and matter. There are other realms or spheres of existence. The other thing that's noteworthy is the fact that that entity, this with the lion-like face and the serpentine body, it couldn't just appear in my room. If you notice, it had to create a portal to enter into our reality. Or it knows how to navigate with those portals to use them almost like highways to travel. But the fact that that the portal opened up and it took a while for the entity to come into the room shows that there's kind of something going on here. Now, I read the Nag Hammadi library over the summer. And the Gnostics and the Gnostic sects, they had their mythology has the view of Sophia being an aeon, an emanation of God, creating a creature because she wanted to be like God or create something without her zystergenic partner. And the result was kind of a hideous monster, so to speak. But it's described in some of the Gnostic scriptures. And these were written almost 2,000 years ago. So I'm going to read actually a section of the Nag Hammadi library. And this is something I just came across about 2 years ago. So this is from the Apocryphon of John. It's an ancient Gnostic text, originated about 185 AD, the Common Era. It talks of a lion-faced serpent that resulted from the Aeon Sophia's error. And I'll read this paragraph to you. It's quoted from the ancient languages to English here, but it says, here's what it says. And when she saw the consequences of her desire, meaning Sophia's desire, Sophia is the she here, it changed into a form of a lion-faced serpent, and its eyes were like lightning fires which flash. She cast it away from her, outside that place, that no one of her mortal ones might see it, for she had created it in ignorance. And she surrounded it with a luminous cloud, and she placed a throne in the middle of the cloud, that no one might see it except the Holy Spirit, who is called the Mother of the Living. And she called his name Yaldabaoth. I had no knowledge of Gnosticism until 2020. And yet I had these experiences back in 1990, 1991. So either the Gnostics were a bunch of schizophrenics running around back then, seeing the same things. But here's the thing. Hallucination should be random. How is it that I saw something that the ancient scriptures referred to over 2,000 years ago and have written about? The notion of this lion-faced serpent, the notion of it being in a cloud. The similarities are too uncanny to ignore. So I guess what I'm summarizing here, what I'd like to point out is the fact that schizophrenia, it's a shamanic journey. The way the medical establishment and pharmaceutical industry treats it, it's basically destroying these people's souls. It's not allowing them to go through the processes that they need to. Tranquilizing, just drugging them out is not the way. I was one of the fortunate ones because I recognize that this truly is a mystical experience, truly is a shamanic journey. It's both terrifying and ecstatic. So that second entity that I saw, I don't know if that was Sophia herself. It could have been Barbalo. It could have been a holy guardian angel. Could have been some other aeon. Could have been a seraphim, a cherub. There's all different ways of interpreting this stuff. You know, the demons and archons are real, and it's just how we approach and deal with them. So I do feel like there's some sort of spiritual battle or something's coming to a head in the divine realms. I know humanity has said that in every other century of history that something's going on up there, but there's stuff going on. Now I don't know if what I did back in 1991. I don't know if with my projected love, I somehow destroyed this evil thing that was coming at me. I don't know if I just pushed it away. As I said, I don't know if these were initiations, tests, torments, tribulations, but I survived, and here I am today. So I think people have to realize that there is meaning to our existence. We don't exactly know what it is. Human beings are a necessity within the cosmic order. We have our role to play in this universe. And I think once people realize that, it may reduce some of the disorder and chaos we're currently encountering in this world.
Very strange stuff. But anyway, can you tell me that? Can you just hold up the book again and give everybody the name of the book and where they can get it?
The book is called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. No, that's blurring out or not.
It is a bit, yeah. Don't worry about it.
Okay. But and my website is Asterox Rising. It's all one word, .com. And again, it's paperback's available on Amazon. The electronic format is available on a lot of other providers like Barnes and Noble and Apple. But if you go to my website, again, astroxrising.com, there'll be links on that for how you can access the book.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, it's been really fascinating chatting with you, Anon. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really illuminating and engaging to listen to your story about your experiences, and thank you very much for sharing them and coming on the Spirit Box.
It's my pleasure. Really enjoyed talking with you, Dara.
Fantastic. Fascinating story, absolutely fascinating story. I really enjoyed that. That was I was transfixed for that. I really was. If you want to find out more about Anon's work, then do check the show notes. He's got a serious tome with all his thoughts and experiences in there. So do check that out. Right, that's it for me. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to The Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon.